When a cruel biker kicked a homeless man's dog in a supermarket parking lot, he was completely unaware that Morgan Freeman was watching. What began as just another day ignored by the world quickly turned into an event no one in that parking lot would ever forget. Something cruel was about to happen, but by a twist of fate, someone was about to appear at the right time and the right place to change everything. The supermarket parking lot bustled with the usual afternoon activity. Shopping carts rattled across the asphalt as people hurried through their routines, faces buried in their phones or fixed on their destinations. No one noticed the homeless man sitting against the wall at the far end of the lot, his weathered cardboard sign propped beside him reading, "Anything helps, God bless." Beside him lay a medium-sized dog with soulful brown eyes and a coat that had once been golden, but was now matted and dusty from life on the streets. Thomas Ward stroked Scout's head gently, his fingers working through the tangles in the dog's fur. "Just a little longer, buddy," he whispered. "Maybe we'll get enough for a real meal tonight." Scout looked up at him with unwavering trust, a trust that had been forged through 3 years of shared hardship. Before Scout, Thomas had been on the verge of giving up. After losing his teaching job, then his house, and finally his dignity, he had found himself standing on a bridge one cold November night, staring down at the dark water below. It was Scout, then a stray himself, who had approached Thomas, pressing his warm body against the man's legs as if to say, "You're not alone anymore." From that moment they had been inseparable. Where Thomas went, Scout followed, offering the unconditional love that humans had long since withheld. Across the parking lot, a black Lincoln town car sat idling, its tinted windows concealing its occupant from curious eyes. Morgan Freeman sat in the back seat, reading through a script for his next film, while his driver had gone into the store to pick up a few items. Morgan enjoyed these quiet moments away from sets and studios, these glimpses into ordinary life. That fame often kept at a distance. Looking up from his pages, his attention was drawn to Thomas and Scout. There was something about the pair that touched him, the gentle way the man stroked his dog, despite his own obvious suffering, the dignity he maintained in circumstances that had stripped away almost everything else. Morgan had always believed that character was revealed not in moments of triumph but in moments of hardship, and what he saw in Thomas spoke volumes. The peaceful scene was shattered by the roar of a motorcycle. A Harley-Davidson tore through the parking lot, engine deliberately revving to announce its presence. The biker, a large man with a leather vest and arms covered in tattoos, stopped near the entrance, dismounting with theatrical flair. Ray Harding surveyed the parking lot like a predator, his eyes narrow beneath his heavy brow. Life had not turned out as Ray had planned. 10 years ago he had been wearing suits to a corner office, but a series of bad investments, a nasty divorce, and an escalating drinking problem had left him bitter and full of rage. Now he found his place in the world through intimidation, through making others feel as small as he secretly felt himself. As Ray strode toward the store entrance, his gaze fell on Thomas and Scout. His lips curled into a sneer. People like this were easy targets for the anger that constantly simmered just beneath Ray's surface. "Hey," Ray called out, changing direction and walking toward Thomas. "This ain't a hotel, you know. People gotta shop here." Thomas lowered his eyes, a learned response to confrontation. "Just trying to get by, sir," he said quietly. "We're not bothering anyone." "Not bothering anyone?" Ray scoffed, his voice carrying across the parking lot. "You and that mutt are an eyesore. People work for a living, you know. They don't want to see this." Scout sensed the tension and moved closer to Thomas, his body pressing protectively against his owner's leg. In the town, Carl Morgan set down his script, his attention fully captured by the unfolding scene. He watched as Ray continued his verbal assault, noting how Thomas seemed to physically shrink with each cutting word. "Please," Thomas said, his voice barely audible, "we'll move along." But Ray wasn't finished. There was something about Thomas's submission that only fueled his cruelty. "That dog probably has fleas," he spat. "Probably disease, too." Scout, as if understanding he was being insulted, gave a soft whine and looked up at Ray with eyes that questioned rather than threatened. It was this innocent response that seemed to push Ray over the edge. In a moment of pure malice, he pulled back his boot and kicked Scout in the side. The dog yelped in pain, the sound cutting through the ambient noise of the parking lot like a knife. "No!" Thomas cried out, reaching for Scout as the dog scrambled back in fear and confusion. "Please, don't hurt him." Morgan Freeman felt something shift inside him, a quiet rage mixed with resolve. He had witnessed many things in his 70-plus years, but cruelty without purpose, the infliction of pain for its own sake, was something he could never understand or abide. Ray took another step forward, his face twisted in a cruel smile. "What's the matter? Gonna cry over a mutt?" He raised his boot again, threatening another kick. Inside the town car, Morgan reached for the door handle. He had played many roles in his life, prisoners, presidents, God himself, but now he was simply a man who could not sit by and watch suffering when he had the power to intervene. Thomas was trying to shield Scout with his body, tears streaming down his weathered face. "He's all I have," he pleaded. "Please." Ray laughed, the sound harsh and devoid of joy. "Pathetic," he sneered, raising his boot once more. But before his foot could connect, a voice rolled across the parking lot like distant thunder, deep, resonant, and filled with a quiet authority that made everyone within earshot freeze. "That's enough." Ray turned, foot still raised, to find the source of the interruption. His eyes widened as he recognized the man now standing beside the black town car, his distinguished profile unmistakable even from a distance. Morgan Freeman had stepped out of the shadows, and in that moment he was about to change the course of all their lives. The parking lot fell silent as Morgan Freeman stepped forward, his measured stride carrying the quiet confidence of a man who had nothing to prove. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the asphalt, highlighting the stark contrast between the elegant figure approaching and the harsh tableau before him. Ray Harding stood frozen, his foot still slightly raised, caught in the moment of intended cruelty. The recognition in his eyes was immediate. That face, that voice, unmistakable even to someone who rarely visited movie theaters. Morgan Freeman. Ray's voice carried a mix of surprise and defensive aggression. He lowered his foot and straightened, his posture, trying to regain his composure. Morgan continued his approach, his expression calm but resolute. He stopped a few feet away, his gaze moving from Ray to Thomas and Scout, then back to Ray. "I believe the gentleman asked you to leave his dog alone," he said, his voice carrying that distinctive timbre that had narrated humanity's stories for decades. By now, shoppers had begun to take notice. A small circle formed at a safe distance, phones appearing in hands, recording the unexpected encounter. The world was watching, though Ray was too focused on Morgan to fully register this fact. "This isn't your business," Ray growled, but his voice lacked the conviction it had carried moments earlier. Morgan tilted his head slightly. "When someone hurts those who can't defend themselves, it becomes everyone's business." He gestured toward Scout, who was still trembling against Thomas's leg. "What has that dog ever done to deserve your cruelty?" Ray shifted uncomfortably, aware of the growing audience. "Look, I don't need a lecture from some Hollywood." "This isn't about Hollywood," Morgan interrupted, his voice firm but not raised. "This is about what kind of man chooses to kick a homeless person's dog for sport." He paused, letting the words hang in the air. "What does that say about your character?" The question landed like a physical blow. Ray's face flushed with a mixture of anger and shame. "You don't know me," he spat, taking a step toward Morgan. "You don't know my life." Morgan stood his ground, unintimidated. "I know what I saw. I know there's a difference between strength and cruelty. One builds, the other destroys." His eyes held Ray's gaze with unwavering intensity. "Right now, you're destroying a woman." In the growing crowd called out, "Tell him, Mr. Freeman." Another bystander added, "We got it all on video." Ray glanced around, suddenly aware of the phones pointed in his direction, the witnesses to his humiliation multiplying by the second. His hands clenched into fists at his sides. "You trying to make me look bad?" he hissed, lowering his voice as he took another step toward Morgan. "You managed that all on your own," Morgan replied evenly. "But it's not too late to make a different choice." Behind Ray, Thomas had gathered Scout into his arms. the dog whimpering softly against his chest. The homeless man's eyes darted between the actor and the biker, fear and disbelief mingling in his expression. "Mr. Freeman," Thomas said softly. "You don't have to do this, we can just go." Morgan's expression softened as he looked at Thomas. "You have every right to be here, sir, you and your dog." He turned back to Ray, his voice taking on a deeper gravity. "It's not the man with the least who should leave. It's the man who would add to his suffering." Ray's face contorted with rage and embarrassment. "You think you're better than me because you're famous, because you've got money." He gestured wildly around the parking lot. "This is the real world, not some movie set where you get to play the hero." "This has nothing to do with fame," Morgan said calmly. "This is about basic human decency." The gathering crowd murmured in agreement, their collective presence creating a palpable pressure on Ray. A security guard from the supermarket had appeared at the edge of the group, assessing the situation with concern. Ray noticed the guard and realized his position was becoming untenable. The fury in his eyes gave way to calculation. He needed to leave, but not without saving face. "Whatever," he sneered, taking a step back. "Not worth my time anyway." He pointed a finger at Morgan. "But you don't know who you're messing with. Some of us live in the real world, where actions have consequences." Morgan didn't flinch. "I'm counting on that," he replied, the weight of his words hanging in the air between them. For a tense moment, it seemed Ray might lunge forward, might choose violence over retreat. But the phones, the witnesses, the undeniable presence of Morgan Freeman himself, it was too much. With a final glare, Ray turned and stalked back to his motorcycle. "This isn't over," he called over his shoulder, loud enough for Morgan to hear, but not so loud as to be clearly recorded by the bystanders. The motorcycle roared to life, the engine's aggressive growl matching its owner's mood. Ray peeled out of the parking lot, the back tire spinning briefly before finding traction, leaving a black mark on the asphalt, a small, petty act of defiance. As the noise of the motorcycle faded, Morgan turned to Thomas and Scout. The crowd began to disperse slightly, though many remained watching from a respectful distance. "Are you both all right?" Morgan asked, his voice gentle now, the authority he had projected giving way to genuine concern. Thomas nodded, still holding Scout protectively. "Yes, sir, thank you. I don't know what to say." Morgan knelt down, bringing himself to eye level with the seated man and his dog. "May I?" he asked, extending a hand toward Scout. Thomas nodded, and Morgan gently stroked the dog's head. Scout, sensing something trustworthy in this new human, cautiously licked Morgan's hand. "He's a good judge of character," Thomas said with a small smile, the first he had shown that day. "The best," Morgan agreed. He looked more closely at Scout. "He might need to be checked out, though. That kick looked painful." Thomas's face fell. "I can't afford a vet." Morgan stood up, decision made. "I know someone who can help. A friend of mine runs a veterinary clinic not far from here." He extended his hand to Thomas. "If you'll allow me, I'd like to make sure your friend here gets the care he needs." Thomas looked at the offered hand, hesitation and hope warring in his expression. After a lifetime of being overlooked, being seen, truly seen by someone like Morgan Freeman, was almost too much to process. "Why would you help us?" Thomas asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Morgan's answer was simple but profound. "Because we're all connected. Your pain, Scout's pain, it matters." He gestured to the world around them. "And sometimes being in the right place at the right time means you're exactly where you're supposed to be." Thomas reached up and took Morgan's hand. The Lincoln Town car moved smoothly through the late afternoon traffic, a quiet sanctuary from the world outside. Thomas sat awkwardly on the plush leather seat, Scout cradled in his arms, both of them, out of place in the luxury vehicle. Morgan Freeman sat beside them, his presence both commanding and comforting. "I'm Morgan, by the way," he said, as if his name wasn't known across the globe. "And you are?" "Thomas Ward, the homeless," man replied, his voice still carrying the hint of education and refinement that life on the streets hadn't completely erased. "And this is Scout." Morgan nodded, reaching over to gently scratch behind Scout's ears. "Named after the character from To Kill a Mockingbird?" Thomas looked up in surprise. "Yes." "How did you know?" A smile played at the corners of Morgan's mouth. "I know a thing or two about literature, and that book in particular." "It was my favorite," Thomas admitted. "I used to teach it, actually." Morgan's eyebrows raised slightly. "You were a teacher, high school English, for almost 20 years. Thomas looked down at Scout, his fingers working methodically through the dog's fur. "That was before." Morgan didn't press, but his silence offered an invitation to continue. "My wife Sarah got sick," Thomas said after a moment. "Cancer, the insurance, it wasn't enough, not nearly enough." His voice grew distant, as if reciting a story that had happened to someone else. "I spent everything we had trying to save her. Sold the house, cashed in retirement, took out loans. But in the end," he shook his head, unable to finish the sentence. "I'm sorry," Morgan said simply. "After she was gone, there was nothing left. No money, no home, just debts." Thomas stroked Scout's head absently. "I tried to keep going, but then the school cut positions, and I was the newest hire in my department." Morgan noticed how Thomas's posture had changed as he spoke, straightening almost imperceptibly, his diction becoming more precise. A glimpse of the man he had been before tragedy rewrote his story. "And Scout?" Morgan asked, gently steering the conversation away from the most painful memories. Thomas's expression softened. "He found me at my lowest point. I wasn't planning to see another sunrise." He swallowed hard. "I was standing on the Adams Street Bridge, looking down at the water, when this dog just appeared beside me. He didn't bark or jump. He just leaned against my leg and looked up at me with these eyes." Thomas glanced down at Scout, like he knew exactly what I was thinking, and he was saying, "Not yet." Scout, as if understanding he was the subject of the conversation, lifted his head slightly and licked Thomas's hand. He wouldn't leave my side after that, followed me everywhere, and somehow having him there, having someone who needed me. Thomas shrugged. "It was enough to keep going one day at a time." Morgan nodded, understanding the profound simplicity of it. Sometimes that's all we can do, one day at a time. The car slowed, pulling into the parking lot of a modern building with a sign reading Lakeside Veterinary Clinic. Through the window, Thomas could see that it was clearly an upscale practice, the kind that catered to pets whose owners thought nothing of spending hundreds on routine care. "We're here," Morgan said as the driver came around to open the door. Thomas hesitated. "Mr. Freeman, I appreciate this, but places like this, they don't serve people like me." Morgan's expression remained kind but firm. "They serve animals who need help, and today they're serving Scout." He stepped out of the car and turned back to offer his hand. "And please call me Morgan." Inside, the receptionist's eyes widened as Morgan Freeman walked through the door, accompanied by a clearly homeless man carrying a dog. To her credit, she recovered quickly, her professional demeanor returning. "Mr. Freeman, Dr. Eleanor is expecting you," she said with a smile, pressing a button to unlock the door to the examination rooms. "Go right back to room 3. Dr. Eleanor. Patel was a woman in her 40s with warm eyes and an efficient manner. If she was surprised by the unusual group entering her exam room, she didn't show it. Her focus immediately went to Scout. "Let's have a look at this fellow," she said, patting the examination table. Thomas carefully placed Scout on the table, murmuring reassurances. The dog was tense, but remained calm, his trust in Thomas evident. Dr. Patel examined Scout thoroughly, her gentle hands moving with practiced precision. "You said he was kicked in the ribs?" she asked, pressing carefully along Scout's side. Thomas nodded, his face darkening at the memory. "Well, he's lucky. No signs of broken ribs, but he's going to have some bruising and soreness." She continued her examination. "How long have you had him?" "About 3 years," Thomas replied. "He found me, actually." Dr. Patel smiled. "That happens more often than you might think. Dogs have a way of finding the people who need them most." She moved her stethoscope over Scout's chest. "His heart sounds good, but he's definitely underweight, and he has some skin issues that need attention." As she continued the examination, detailing various minor health concerns, Thomas's expression grew increasingly worried. Morgan, sensing his anxiety, placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. Whatever Scout needs, it's taken care of, he said quietly. Dr. Patel finished her examination and stepped back. Overall, he's in surprisingly good condition considering he's been living rough. You've taken good care of him, Mr. Ward. Thomas looked up in surprise, both at the compliment and at being addressed as Mr. Ward, a small dignity he hadn't experienced in years. I do my best, he said softly. He eats before I do. Dr. Patel nodded, understanding the depth of that simple statement. I'd like to give him some medication for the pain, some antibiotics for a minor infection I found, and a medicated bath for his skin issues. Would it be all right if we keep him for a couple of hours? Thomas's hand instinctively tightened on Scout's fur. I don't usually leave him. You can stay too, Dr. Patel assured him. We have a comfortable waiting area, or... She glanced at Morgan, a silent communication passing between them. We have a staff break room where you could wait in private, maybe get something to eat. Morgan nodded slightly, confirming the unspoken plan. Thomas, why don't you let Dr. Patel take care of Scout? I'd like to talk with you if you don't mind. Thomas hesitated, looking down at Scout, who met his gaze with unwavering trust. Finally, he nodded. Okay. He leaned down to Scout's ear. I'll be right outside, buddy. These people are going to help you feel better. As a veterinary technician gently led Scout away, Thomas watched him go with visible anxiety. Morgan guided him to the break room, where a fresh pot of coffee and an array of sandwiches had appeared as if by magic. Please eat something, Morgan said, gesturing to the food. Thomas looked at the spread, then back at Morgan, confusion evident in his expression. Why are you doing all this? You don't even know me. Morgan considered the question carefully. Sometimes in life, we're placed in certain moments for a reason. I believe I was in that parking lot today for a purpose. He paused, his eyes meeting Thomas's directly. And I have a proposition for you if you're willing to listen. The Roadhouse Bar sat on the outskirts of the city, a weathered building, with neon beer signs casting a sickly glow through windows, hazed by decades of cigarette smoke. Inside, the afternoon crowd was sparse. A few regulars hunched over their drinks, a country song playing softly from an ancient jukebox in the corner. Ray Harding slammed through the door, his rage radiating from him like heat. He stormed to the bar, his heavy boots striking the wooden floor with unnecessary force. Jack Daniels, he barked at the bartender. Double. The bartender, a heavy-set man with tattoos covering his arms, raised an eyebrow but poured the drink without comment. He'd known Ray long enough to recognize when questions weren't welcome. Ray downed half the whiskey in one swallow, embracing the burn. The humiliation of the parking lot confrontation still seared his pride. Morgan Freeman. Of all the people who could have witnessed his moment of fury, it had to be someone untouchable, someone the whole world respected. Rough day? The voice came from a man seated 2 stools down, Vincent Mercer, his expensive leather jacket and manicured hands, marking him as out of place in the dive bar. Ray glanced at him, then back at his drink. Tayo could say that. Vincent signaled the bartender for a refill of Ray's whiskey. Let me guess. The world keeps proving it doesn't understand men like us. Ray studied Vincent with narrowed eyes, wondering if this was coincidence or if word had already spread. What do you know about men like me? Vincent smiled, a practiced expression that never reached his eyes. I know that society has changed. Men who speak their minds, who aren't afraid to take what they want. We're villainized now. He slid over to the stool next to Ray's. 10. Years ago we were the ones running things. Now they want us quiet, docile. The words resonated with something dark in Ray's mind. 10 years ago he had been someone, Raymond Harding, regional sales director at Meridian Pharmaceuticals. Corner office, company car, respect. Before the divorce, before the drinking, before the pharmaceutical scandal that had cost him everything. I had it all once, Ray muttered, more to himself than to Vincent. And then they took it from you, Vincent replied smoothly. I've seen it happen. Good men, strong men, torn down by a system that's rigged against us. Ray's eyes narrowed. Who exactly are you? Vincent extended his hand. Vincent Mercer. I run several businesses in the area. He didn't elaborate on what those businesses might B? But his designer watch and the cold calculation in his eyes suggested they weren't entirely legitimate. Ray Harding, Ray replied, shaking Vincent's hand. I know who you are, Vincent said, a statement that should have been surprising but somehow wasn't. I make it my business to know useful people in this city. Ray drained his glass. Not sure how useful I am these days. Vincent's smile tightened. Let's just say I've observed your persuasive abilities in the past. Men who aren't afraid to get their hands dirty are rare these days. Ray knew what Vincent was referring to, the debt collection jobs he sometimes took, using intimidation to extract payments from people who had borrowed from the wrong sources. It wasn't something he was proud of, but it paid when nothing else would. Yeah, well, my persuasion failed me today, Ray admitted bitterly. Vincent leaned forward slightly. I heard. Morgan Freeman, wasn't it? Ray's head snapped up. How? It's already online, Vincent said, sliding his phone across the bar. On the screen was a video titled, Morgan Freeman confronts bully who kicked homeless man's dog. The view count was already climbing into the thousands. Ray's face burned with renewed humiliation. Son of a... Relax, Vincent interrupted. This could be an opportunity. An opportunity to be the internet's villain of the day? No thanks. Vincent took back his phone, his expression calculating. Fame has a price, Ray. Even for someone like Morgan Freeman. When celebrities get involved in, let's call them street matters, they often find themselves out of their depth. Ray studied Vincent's face, recognizing the implied threat. What are you saying? I'm saying that certain neighborhoods in this city operate under different rules. Rules that even famous actors can't change. Vincent tapped his fingers on the bar. The homeless man and his dog, they're in a place they don't belong, causing problems for legitimate businesses. So what? Not my problem anymore. Vincent's voice lowered. It could be a very profitable problem. My associates and I have been working to clean up certain areas for redevelopment. People like that homeless man interfere with progress. Ray began to understand. Vincent wasn't just a criminal. He was a businessman with a plan. And Freeman stepping in complicates things. Precisely. Vincent nodded to the bartender for another round. Celebrity involvement brings attention, and attention is bad for business. Ray took a long swallow of his fresh drink, feeling the familiar warmth spreading through his chest. What's this got to do with me? Find out where Freeman took them, Vincent said simply. The homeless man and the dog. We need to send a message that well-meaning interference isn't welcome in our part of the city. Ray hesitated. Intimidation was one thing, but this sounded like it could escalate into something more serious. I don't know, man. Freeman's not just anyone. He's connected. Vincent's eyes hardened. So am I, Ray. More connected than you know. To emphasize. His point? Vincent nodded toward the door. Ray turned to see two men enter the bar, large, expressionless individuals whose jackets couldn't quite conceal the bulges of shoulder holsters. Besides, Vincent continued, his voice smoother now, I'm not asking you to touch Freeman. Just find the homeless man, deliver a message. He pulled out a thick envelope and slid it across the bar. Consider this a down payment. Ray stared at the envelope. Inside, he knew, would be enough cash to solve his immediate problems. The overdue rent, the child support he'd been dodging, maybe even enough to get his bike fixed properly. What kind of message? Ray asked, his voice lower now. Vincent smiled again, that same cold expression. The kind that reminds people to mind their own business. Nothing permanent, just educational. Ray's mind flashed back to the parking lot, to the way Morgan Freeman had looked at him, not with fear or even anger, but with something worse. Disappointment. Judgment. As if Ray was less than a man who had fallen so far he was kicking dogs for entertainment. The memory stoked the embers of his resentment. Who was Freeman to judge him, to humiliate him in public, to look at him with those eyes that had seen everything and found him wanting? Ray took the envelope, tucking it inside his jacket. I'll find them. Vincent nodded, satisfied. Good man. Remember, we're just restoring the natural order. People should stay in their lanes. He stood up, dropping a $100 bill on the bar. Call this number when you locate them, he added, sliding a business card next to Ray's glass. As Vincent and his men left, Ray sat alone, staring at his reflection in the mirror behind the bar. He barely recognized the man looking back at him. Hollow-eyed, unkempt, anger etched into the lines of his face. How had he fallen so far? From respected executive to this, a thug for hire, tracking a homeless man and his dog for cash. But then again, what choice did he have? The world had taken everything from him. Why shouldn't he take something back? Ray drained his glass and stood up. It was time to hunt. The sun was setting over the city, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple as Morgan Freeman's driver pulled the Lincoln town car into the parking lot of the Sunset View Motel. It wasn't luxurious by any standard, but it was clean and respectable, a far cry from the shelters and alleyways Thomas had called home for the past 3 years. "We're here," Morgan said as the car came to a stop. Thomas looked out the window uncertainly, Scout cradled in his arms. The dog, freshly bathed and treated at the veterinary clinic, had a new collar and leash, simple but sturdy, a deep blue that complemented his honey-colored coat. "I can't accept this," Thomas said, his voice tinged with both gratitude and apprehension. "It's too much." Morgan turned to face him directly. "Thomas, what happened today in that parking lot? That wasn't just about a man kicking a dog. It was about how we treat each other, about who we choose to be when faced with cruelty or kindness." His deep voice carried the weight of conviction. "I'm not offering charity. I'm offering a chance to restart." Thomas looked down at Scout, who seemed more peaceful than he had in months, the immediate relief from pain medication evident in his relaxed posture. "Why don't we go inside?" Morgan suggested gently. "Just to talk." Reluctantly, Thomas nodded. The driver opened the door, and they stepped out into the early evening air. The motel manager was already waiting at the office door, apparently forewarned about his illustrious guest. "Mr. Freeman," the manager said with a nervous smile, "everything's ready as you requested." Morgan nodded his thanks, and they were led to a ground-floor room at the end of the building. The manager unlocked the door and handed the key to Thomas, whose surprise was evident on his face. Inside, the room was simple but comfortable, a queen-sized bed with fresh linens, a small table with 2 chairs, a television, and a clean bathroom. On the table sat several bags of groceries, dog food, and basic toiletries. "I took the liberty of arranging a few necessities," Morgan explained. "The room is paid for 2 weeks, no strings attached." Thomas stood in the center of the room, overwhelmed by the sudden shift in his circumstances. Scout, sensing the safety of their new environment, cautiously explored, sniffing at the corners and furniture. "I don't know what to say," Thomas whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Morgan gestured to the chairs. "Let's sit and talk for a moment." They settled at the small table, the formality of the situation at odds with the surroundings. Scout came, to lie at Thomas's feet, content to be close to his human. "Dr. Patel told me Scout is undernourished but otherwise in remarkably good health, considering your circumstances," Morgan began. "She said it's clear you've been taking better care of him than yourself." Thomas nodded, his eyes still moving around the room as if he couldn't quite believe where he was. "He depends on me." "And you on him," Morgan observed. "But you both deserve more than survival, Thomas." The former teacher met Morgan's gaze, a flicker of his old dignity visible beneath the weathered exterior. "I've tried. Jobs don't come easy when you have no address, no phone, no clean clothes for interviews." "I understand," Morgan said, and somehow Thomas believed that he did. "That's why I want to offer you something else beyond just this room." Thomas tensed slightly. "What's that?" "A real second chance." Morgan leaned forward, his expression earnest. "I have a friend who runs a literacy program at the community center in Westwood. They need someone with teaching experience to help adults who are trying to improve their reading skills." Thomas blinked in surprise. "Teaching? But I haven't been in a classroom in years, and my appearance can be addressed," Morgan finished for him. "Clean clothes, a haircut, regular meals. These things can change quickly. Your knowledge, your experience as an educator, that hasn't gone anywhere." Thomas ran a hand over his beard, which had grown wild during his years on the street. "I'm not sure I even remember how to be that person anymore." Morgan's eyes softened with understanding. You don't have to be the person you were, just the person you can be now with the wisdom you've gained through hardship. Scout shifted at Thomas's feet, letting out a contented sigh. The sound seemed to center Thomas, reminding him of the constant that had kept him going through his darkest days. Would they allow Scout to come with me? He asked. Morgan smiled. I already discussed it with them. They think having Scout there could actually be beneficial. Many of their students are uncomfortable in traditional learning environments. A friendly dog might help put them at ease. For the first time that day, a genuine smile broke across Thomas's face. He would be good at that. He's never met a stranger he didn't like. Unlike his owner, Morgan observed gently, who's had good reason to be wary of people. Thomas nodded, acknowledging the truth of this. When you've been invisible, long enough being seen becomes frightening. Yet here you are, Morgan said, being seen having this conversation. Thomas looked around the motel room again, then down at Scout, and finally back to Morgan. What if I fail? What if I can't readjust to normal life? Then you try something else, Morgan replied simply. The point isn't to succeed immediately at everything. It's to have the opportunity to try it all. Thomas considered this, his teacher's mind recognizing the wisdom in the approach. I suppose I could give it a chance. For Scout's sake, if nothing else. Morgan nodded, satisfied. The position doesn't start for 3 days. That gives you time to rest, to let Scout recover fully, and to prepare yourself. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a business card. My personal number. If you need anything day or night, call me. Thomas accepted the card, holding it carefully, as if it might disintegrate in his fingers. I don't know how to thank you. Live well, Morgan said simply. That's all the thanks I need. As Morgan stood to leave, Thomas rose as well, Scout following suit. The dog looked up at Morgan and gave a single wag of his tail, as if offering his own thanks. One more thing, Morgan said, reaching into his pocket. He pulled out a simple smartphone in a protective case. It's prepaid for a year. My number and Dr. Patel's are already programmed in. The literacy program coordinator will call you tomorrow to discuss details. Thomas accepted the phone with the same careful reverence he had shown the business card. I'll be ready. Morgan nodded, satisfied. At the door, he turned back one last time. Thomas, what happened in that parking lot today? The cruelty you faced, it doesn't define you. What defines you is that despite everything, you kept your humanity. You cared for Scout when you had nothing else to give. His voice deepened with emotion. That kind of strength is rare. Don't forget it. With those words, Morgan left, the door closing softly behind him. Thomas stood in the middle of the room, the phone in his hand, Scout at his side. Outside, the sun had set completely, darkness falling over the city. But for the first time in years, the night didn't bring fear or desperation. It brought possibility. Well, Scout, Thomas said softly, kneeling down to stroke his faithful companion's head. Looks like we're getting a new beginning after all. Scout licked his hand once, his gentle eyes reflecting a simple truth. They had always been worthy of this chance, even when the world had forgotten them. Rebecca Chen scrolled through her tablet, her fingers swiping with practiced efficiency as the morning light filtered through the windows of Morgan Freeman's home office. As Morgan's personal assistant for 7 years, she had developed an intuition for which matters required his immediate attention. The video has over 2 million views now, she reported, looking up at Morgan, who sat across from her, sipping his morning coffee. You're trending on multiple platforms. People are calling you a hero. Morgan shook his head slightly. I'm no hero. I just happened to be there. Well, the internet disagrees, Rebecca replied, continuing to scroll. But there's something else. Her expression shifted, brows drawing together in concern. I did some digging on that biker, Ray. Harding? Morgan set down his coffee cup. And? He's got connections and not the good kind. Rebecca handed him the tablet. He's been linked to several debt collection incidents, the kind that end with people in hospitals. And lately he's been seen with this man. Morgan studied the image on the screen. A well-dressed man in his 40s, standing outside an upscale club, surrounded by what appeared to be security personnel. Vincent Mercer, Rebecca continued. On paper, he's a real estate developer and club owner. Off paper, he's suspected of running protection rackets in 3 neighborhoods, including the area where you found Thomas and Scout. Morgan's expression remained composed, but his eyes narrowed slightly. Has he been charged with anything? Investigated twice, never charged. Witnesses tend to forget what they saw, and evidence has a way of disappearing. Rebecca took back the tablet. The point is, your parking lot intervention might have stepped on some powerful toes. Morgan considered this information, his mind working through the implications. You think Thomas might still be in danger. It wasn't a question, but Rebecca nodded anyway. If Mercer is trying to clean up that neighborhood for development, anyone drawing attention to the homeless population there would be unwelcome. And now there's a viral video. Morgan stood, walking to the window that overlooked the city spread out below. Call Dr. Patel. Ask her to check in on Thomas and Scout today, and contact the motel, see if they can move him to a room that's not visible from the street. Rebecca was already typing notes. What about security? Morgan turned, his decision made. Arrange for someone to keep an eye on the motel discreetly, and call James at the community center. Tell him we need to accelerate the plan for Thomas's position. You're not backing down, Rebecca observed. Some storms can't be avoided, Morgan replied. They can only be weathered. Thomas stood before the bathroom mirror, hardly recognizing the man staring back at him. 3 days of regular meals, hot showers, and peaceful sleep had already begun to transform him. With the supplies Morgan had provided, he had trimmed his beard into something neat and intentional, rather than wild and unkempt. A knock at the door startled him. Scout, lounging on the bed, lifted his head and gave a soft woof. It's okay, boy, Thomas reassured him, moving cautiously to the door. Peering through the peephole, he relaxed at the sight of Dr. Patel's smiling face. Good morning, she greeted him when he opened the door. I thought I'd check how Scout is doing. He's much better, Thomas replied, stepping aside to let her in. The medication has really helped with his pain. Dr. Patel kneeled to examine Scout, who greeted her with an enthusiastic tail wag, remembering her gentle touch from the clinic. He looks good, she confirmed after a brief examination. And you're looking better too, if you don't mind my saying so. Thomas smiled faintly. It's amazing what a few days of stability can do. As she stood, Dr. Patel's expression grew more serious. Thomas, there's something else. Morgan asked me to let you know that the motel management is going to offer you a different room later today, one towards the back of the property. Thomas frowned. Why? Dr. Patel hesitated. Just a precaution. That video of what happened in the parking lot has gotten quite a bit of attention online. Video? Thomas echoed, confusion evident in his voice. Someone recorded the confrontation between Morgan and that biker, she explained. It's gone viral, over 2 million views. Thomas sank onto the edge of the bed, the implications washing over him. So everyone can see it, anyone? Dr. Patel nodded. I'm afraid so. Morgan thinks it might be better if you're a little less visible for a while. Because of the biker? Ray? Thomas's hand automatically went to Scout's head, seeking the comfort of the dog's presence. Just a precaution, Dr. Patel repeated, but her tone lacked conviction. Morgan also wanted me to tell you that James from the literacy program will be coming by this afternoon instead of tomorrow. They're eager to get you started. Thomas nodded slowly, processing this information. Dr. Patel, is Morgan worried about something specific? She met his gaze directly. Morgan believes in being prepared, Thomas. It doesn't mean anything will happen. But Thomas had spent 3 years on the streets, where survival depended on recognizing danger before it arrived. The fine hairs on the back of his neck prickled with familiar warning. Thank you for being honest, he said quietly. After Dr. Patel left, Thomas sat on the bed, Scout's head in his lap. For the first time since Morgan had brought him to the motel, he felt the old anxiety returning. He had been given a glimpse of a better life, but now the shadows of his past seemed to be reaching for him again. We've weathered worse, haven't we, boy? He murmured to Scout, who looked up at him with unwavering trust. Ray Harding sat in his battered pickup truck across the street from Lakeside Veterinary Clinic, watching as Dr. Patel emerged, and got into her car. He'd spent the past 2 days tracking down leads, calling in favors from people who owed him, and finally he'd gotten a tip that the homeless man's dog had been treated here. He started his engine, prepared to follow her. Vincent Mercer's instructions had been clear. Find the homeless man and his dog, find out what Morgan Freeman was up to, and report back. The substantial payment that had followed those instructions was enough to ensure Ray's cooperation, but there was something else driving him now, a burning need to restore his pride after the public humiliation he'd suffered. As he pulled into traffic behind Dr. Patel's car, his phone buzzed with a text message from Vincent. Progress? Ray typed back one-handed. Following a lead now, close. The reply came almost immediately. Good. Remember, we need to know what Freeman's planning. This goes beyond just one homeless man. Ray frowned at the message. What could Morgan Freeman possibly be planning that would concern someone like Vincent Mercer? It didn't make sense, but then again, the money didn't require understanding, only results. Dr. Patel's car turned onto the highway, leading toward the western edge of the city. Ray followed at a careful distance, his mind racing. Whatever Freeman was up to, whatever connection he had to the homeless man and his dog, Ray was determined to find out. The gathering storm clouds above mirrored his darkening thoughts. Something was building on the horizon, something that went beyond a simple confrontation in a parking lot. And Ray Harding, for better or worse, was now caught in its path. The E Community Center in Westwood buzzed with quiet activity as Morgan Freeman walked through its doors, nodding greetings to the staff who tried to maintain their professional composure despite the presence of a Hollywood legend in their midst. James Wright, the center's director, hurried forward to meet him, extending his hand with a warm smile. Morgan, thanks for coming on such short notice, James said, guiding him toward a small conference room at the back of the building. Thomas, he's in my office getting oriented. I have to say, he's not what I expected. Morgan raised an eyebrow. In what way? Based on what you told me, I was expecting someone more. James paused, searching for the right word. Broken? Morgan suggested. James nodded, but there's something in his eyes, a dignity, a quiet intelligence. He spoke about teaching methods that I haven't heard discussed outside of education conferences. Morgan smiled. The streets may have taken his possessions, but they didn't take his mind. In the director's office, Thomas sat reviewing a curriculum guide. Scout settled contentedly at his feet. 3 days of decent meals and rest had already begun to restore some of his former self. His clothes, new simple items Morgan had arranged to be delivered to the motel, fit his frame better than anything he'd worn in years. When Morgan and James entered, Thomas stood, extending his hand with a newfound confidence. Mr. Freeman, he said warmly, James has been explaining the program to me. It's exactly what I needed. Morgan clasped his hand firmly. I thought it might be. And please, it's Morgan. James gestured for them all to sit. Thomas was just sharing some ideas about how we might adapt our teaching methods for adults with learning disabilities. I'm impressed. Thomas shook his head modestly. Just drawing on old experience. When you teach high school English for 20 years, you learn how to reach people who think they can't learn. Morgan studied Thomas carefully. The man sitting before him was visibly different from the person he'd encountered in the parking lot just days ago. There was color in his face, clarity in his eyes, and a straightening of his posture that spoke of returning pride. I have a proposition for all of us, Morgan said, his deep voice filling the small office. The work you're doing here, James. Literacy, community support, second chances. It deserves more attention. James tilted his head. What did you have in mind? A community gathering, here at the center. An opportunity to highlight the programs you offer and the people you help. Morgan's gaze shifted to Thomas, and perhaps a chance to change the conversation about homelessness in this city. Thomas's expression grew cautious. You want me to speak, to tell my story? Only if you're comfortable doing so, Morgan assured him. But stories like yours, a dedicated teacher who lost everything due to circumstances beyond his control, they challenge people's preconceptions about who ends up on the streets and why. Thomas looked down at Scout, who gazed back at him with unwavering trust. After a moment, he nodded. "If it could help others understand, yes, I'll do it." Morgan smiled. "Good. James, can we organize something for this weekend? I can help ensure we get media coverage." James looked slightly overwhelmed, but nodded enthusiastically. "Of course. We've been trying to raise awareness about our programs for years. With your involvement—" "It's not about me," Morgan interrupted gently. "It's about the work being done here and the people like Thomas who deserve a second chance." As they discussed the details of the event, none of them noticed the pickup truck parked across the street or its driver watching the building with narrowed eyes. Ray Harding slumped back in his seat, processing what he had just witnessed. He had followed Dr. Patel to the Sunset View Motel yesterday, confirming the homeless man was staying there. This morning, he'd watched as a car picked Thomas up and brought him to this community center. And now Morgan Freeman himself had arrived. Whatever was happening here went beyond simple charity. Ray pulled out his phone and dialed Vincent Mercer's number. "I found them," Ray said when Vincent answered. "The homeless guy is staying at the Sunset View Motel, but he's also got some kind of job at the Westwood Community Center. Freeman just showed up there too." "Interesting." Vincent's voice was cool, calculating. "Any idea what they're planning?" "Not yet," Ray admitted. "But they were in a meeting with the center's director. Looked serious." "Get closer," Vincent ordered. "Find out exactly what Freeman is up to. This goes beyond one homeless man and his dog, Ray. There's something bigger happening." After hanging up, Ray sat in his truck, a strange uneasiness settling over him. Vincent's interest in Freeman's activities seemed disproportionate to the situation. Why would a powerful businessman care so much about one actor helping one homeless person? Unless there was more to the story, something Ray wasn't seeing. 3 days later, the community center's main hall was transformed. Rows of chairs faced a small stage where a podium stood. Behind it hung a banner reading, "Second Chances Rebuilding Lives Through Literacy and Community." Morgan stood at the back of the room, watching as people filed in. Local politicians, media representatives, community members. His plan was working. The event had garnered significant interest, especially once word spread of his involvement. James approached, looking nervous but excited. "We've got a full house. Are you sure you don't want to be the one speaking?" Morgan shook his head. "This isn't about me. Is Thomas ready?" "As ready as he'll be," James replied. "He's nervous, but Scout seems to be keeping him calm." As the room filled, Morgan spotted Rebecca entering through a side door. She made her way directly to him, her expression concerned. "We've got a situation," she said quietly. Security spotted Ray Harding outside. "He's just watching for now, but he's definitely monitoring the event." Morgan's expression remained composed, but his eyes narrowed slightly. "Is he alone?" "As far as we can tell," Rebecca confirmed. "Should we have him removed?" Morgan considered this for a moment, then shook his head. "No, let him watch. Maybe he needs to hear what's said today as much as anyone." The lights dimmed slightly, signaling the start of the program. James took the stage, welcoming everyone and explaining the center's mission. As he introduced the day's main speaker, Morgan watched the side entrance where Thomas waited, Scout by his side. Thomas stepped onto the stage and a murmur went through the crowd. Some recognized him from the viral video. Others were simply surprised by his appearance, a formerly homeless man who now stood before them with dignity and purpose. Scout sat obediently beside him as Thomas approached the podium. He took a deep breath, his eyes finding Morgan in the crowd, drawing strength from the actor's encouraging nod. "My name is Thomas Ward," he began, his voice soft but clear. 3 years ago, I was a high school English teacher with a home, a career, and a purpose. Then my wife got sick. As Thomas shared his story, the catastrophic medical bills, the loss of his job, the spiral into homelessness, the room fell, completely silent. He spoke of the invisibility of life on the streets, of the daily struggle to maintain dignity when the world looked through you rather than at you, and he spoke of Scout, the loyal companion who had given him a reason to live when all hope seemed lost. "We all like to believe we're just 1 or 2 good decisions away from success," Thomas said. his voice growing stronger. "But the truth is, many of us are just one or two tragedies away from devastation. The difference between me and you might not be character or work ethic. It might just be luck." In the back of the room, Morgan noticed Ray Harding slip through the door, moving to stand against the wall, his arms crossed defensively, but his attention fixed on Thomas's words. The storm was gathering, but for now, in this moment, truth was being spoken. And sometimes, Morgan knew, truth was the most powerful stand one could take. The community center event had ended 2 hours ago, but its impact lingered in the night air like electricity before a storm. Thomas sat in his motel room, Scout curled. Beside him on the bed, both exhausted from the day's emotional intensity. His speech had drawn a standing ovation, followed by reporters clamoring for interviews and community members offering handshakes, hugs, and tears. "We did something important today, didn't we, boy?" Thomas murmured, stroking Scout's head. The dog's tail thumped against the bedspread in gentle agreement. His new phone buzzed with a text message from Morgan. "You spoke truth with power today. Rest well. Driver will pick you up tomorrow at 9 a.m. for your first official day." Thomas smiled, still amazed at how rapidly his life had transformed. A week ago he had been invisible, surviving on scraps and kindness. Now his story was being shared across local news channels, his voice heard after years of silence. He set the phone on the nightstand and closed his eyes, allowing exhaustion to pull him towards sleep. He didn't notice the dark sedan that pulled into the motel parking lot just before midnight, or the 3 men who emerged from it, moving with practiced stealth toward the back of the property. At the animal shelter connected to Dr. Patel's veterinary clinic, the night security guard made his hourly rounds, flashlight casting long shadows through the quiet building. The animals stirred slightly as he passed, dogs lifting their heads in curiosity, cats blinking sleepily from their beds. He was halfway through his circuit when he noticed the side door was ajar. Frowning, he approached cautiously, radio in hand. "Base, this is Mike. Possible security breach at the east entrance." Static crackled before the response came. "Copy that. Backup is 15 minutes out. Proceed with caution." Mike hesitated, weighing his options. Protocol said to wait for backup, but if someone was inside, the animals could be in danger. Decision made, he pushed the door open wider, sweeping his flashlight across the darkened corridor beyond. "Security," he called out. "Identify yourself." Silence answered him. He stepped inside, moving carefully toward the main shelter area where the animals were housed. The building felt different somehow, the normal nighttime quiet replaced by an unnatural stillness. Even the dogs, usually quick to bark at the slightest disturbance, remained eerily silent. As he turned the corner, his flashlight beam caught movement. A figure dressed in black ducked between rows of kennels. "Stop right there," Mike shouted, reaching for his radio again. The response was immediate. A fire alarm blaring to life, emergency lights flashing as the building's sprinkler system activated, raining water down from above. Chaos erupted as the animals reacted to the sudden noise and water, dogs barking frantically, cats yowling in distress. Through the confusion, Mike spotted 2 more figures moving through the shelter. One was opening kennel doors, releasing the confused and frightened dogs into the corridor. "What are you doing?" Mike lunged forward, but slipped on the wet floor, his radio sliding away across the slick surface. One of the intruders turned toward him, face hidden behind a ski mask. "Teaching a lesson about sticking your nose where it doesn't belong," a male voice growled. The realization hit Mike like a physical blow. This wasn't a simple break-in. This was targeted, organized. But why target an animal shelter before he could process the thought? A searing pain exploded in the back of his head, and darkness claimed him. Thomas was ripped from sleep by the violent pounding on his door. Scout leapt to his feet, a deep growl rumbling from his chest. "Mr. Ward," the voice was urgent, familiar. "Thomas, it's Dr. Patel. Please open up." Heart racing, Thomas rushed to the door, Scout at his heels. Dr. Patel stood outside, her face pale with shock, hair dripping from the rain that had begun to fall. "What's happened?" Thomas asked, ushering her inside. "The shelter," her voice broke. "Someone broke in, released all the animals. The security guard is in the hospital." Thomas guided her to a chair. "Was anyone else hurt?" "No," But many of the animals are missing. They scattered into the streets. She looked up at him, eyes haunted. Thomas, they left a message, spray-painted on the wall. This is what happens when you don't mind your own business. Scout pressed against Thomas's leg, sensing his distress. You think this is because of me? Because of the speech today? Dr. Patel shook her head. I don't know, but I had to warn you. I'm worried they might come here next. The words had barely left her mouth when Thomas's phone rang. Morgan's name flashed on the screen. Thomas, are you all right? Morgan's voice was tense with concern. Yes, Dr. Patel is here. She just told me about the shelter. Pack your things, Morgan interrupted. My driver is already on his way to you. This is escalating faster than I anticipated. What's going on, Morgan? Thomas demanded, fear and confusion mingling in his voice. There was a brief pause before Morgan answered. Vincent Mercer. He's behind this. My sources tell me he's been trying to force out homeless residents and small businesses from several neighborhoods, including where I found you and Scout. Your story, our bringing attention to homeless issues, it's interfering with his development. Plans. Thomas sank onto the bed, the implications washing over him. So all those animals, that's my fault? No, Morgan's voice was firm. This is on Mercer, not you, but I need you safe while we handle this. A knock at the door made them all freeze. Scout's hackles rose, his growl deepening. Thomas? Morgan's voice sharpened. What's happening? Before Thomas could answer, the window shattered, glass exploding inward as something heavy crashed through it. Scout barked ferociously as a canister rolled across the floor, grey smoke beginning to pour from it. Gas! Dr. Patel cried, pulling, her shirt over her nose. We need to get out! Thomas grabbed Scout's leash and his backpack, already packed with his few possessions, a survival habit he hadn't abandoned. Morgan, someone's here! He shouted into the phone before shoving it into his pocket. They rushed to the door, but Thomas paused with his hand on the knob. There might be more of them outside. Dr. Patel pointed to the bathroom. The window, it's small, but we might fit. As the smoke thickened, they hurried into the bathroom. Thomas boosted Dr. Patel through the narrow window first, then lifted Scout, passing the struggling dog into her waiting arms. He was halfway through himself when he heard the motel room door crash open, followed by heavy footsteps. Find them! A voice commanded. With a final desperate push, Thomas squeezed through the window, tumbling onto the wet ground outside. Dr. Patel helped him up, and they ran toward her car, rain pelting their faces as Scout raced alongside them. Headlights suddenly cut through the darkness ahead, illuminating them in harsh white light. Thomas froze, shielding his eyes against the glare, certain they'd been caught. But the vehicle wasn't one of the attackers. It was Morgan Freeman's town car, the driver jumping out to usher them inside. Hurry! The driver urged, opening the back door. They piled in, Scout scrambling across the seat. As the car pulled away, Thomas looked back at the motel. Shadowy figures emerged from his room, searching the perimeter, faces hidden behind masks. Where are we going? Thomas asked, his voice rough from the smoke. Somewhere safe, the driver replied. Mr. Freeman's waiting for you. As they sped through the rainy night, Thomas held Scout close, the reality of their situation sinking in. This wasn't just about one man and his dog anymore. It had become something larger, darker, and more dangerous than he could have imagined. The night pressed against the car windows, as black and impenetrable as the uncertainty that lay ahead. Rain lashed against the windows of Morgan Freeman's secluded estate in the hills above the city. Inside the warm study, Thomas sat in a leather armchair, a blanket draped over his shoulders, Scout curled protectively at his feet. Dr. Patel occupied the couch nearby, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea, while Morgan stood by the fireplace, his expression grave as he listened to the voice on the speakerphone. 3 men, reported Rebecca, Morgan's assistant. Security cameras caught them entering the motel. Police are investigating, but they won't find anything useful, Morgan finished for her. What about the animal shelter? Total chaos. Most of the animals have been recovered, but some are still missing. The security guard has a concussion but will recover. The message was definitely meant for us. Morgan thanked her and ended the call, turning to face Thomas and Dr. Patel. This has gone far beyond intimidation. Mercer isn't just trying to scare you away. He's sending a message to anyone who might support our cause. Thomas shook his head, guilt weighing heavily on him. All those animals. I never thought speaking out would lead to this. That's exactly what men like Mercer count on, Morgan replied. Silence through fear. But there's something he doesn't understand. He sat down across from Thomas, leaning forward intently. When you push good people too far, they don't just surrender. They fight back. A knock at the door interrupted them. Morgan's head of security entered, accompanied by an unexpected visitor. Ray Harding. Scout immediately stood, a low growl building in his throat as he recognized the man who had kicked him. It's all right, Morgan said to the security guard. I've been expecting him. Thomas stared in disbelief. What is he doing here? Ray stood awkwardly in the doorway, his usual aggression absent. He looked smaller somehow, his leather jacket damp from the rain, his face haggard and tired. He reached out to me, Morgan explained. Seems Mr. Harding has had a change of heart. Ray stepped forward, his eyes moving from Morgan to Thomas, then down to Scout. I wasn't part of what happened tonight. At the motel or the shelter, I want you to know that. The room fell silent, the only sound the crackling of the fire and the steady drumming of rain against the windows. Why should we believe you? Dr. Patel finally asked, her voice sharp with suspicion. Ray's shoulders slumped slightly. You shouldn't. I've been working for Mercer, tracking you. He looked directly at Thomas. I followed you to the community center, watched your speech, reported everything back to him. Thomas tensed, anger flashing across his face. So this is your fault? Yeah, Ray admitted, the single word heavy with remorse. But I didn't know he'd go this far. Animals, for Christ's sake. He shook his head. There's a line, you know, and Mercer just keeps crossing it. Morgan studied Ray carefully. Why come? To us now? Because I heard what he's planning next. Ray's voice lowered. Mercer's not stopping with the shelter. He's going to burn down the community center. Tonight. The declaration hit the room like a thunderclap. Dr. Patel gasped, while Thomas stood abruptly, Scout rising with him. We need to call the police, Thomas insisted. Ray barked out a humorless laugh. Mercer owns half the force. By the time the clean cops figure out what's happening, that place will be ashes. Morgan's expression remained calm, but his eyes had darkened with resolve. Then we stop him ourselves. He turned to his security chief. Call James Wright. Tell him to evacuate the center immediately. Then contact every media outlet in the city. Tell them Morgan Freeman has an urgent story about criminal developer Vincent Mercer, and they should send camera crews to the Westwood Community Center right away. The security chief nodded and departed quickly. Morgan turned back to Ray. What's Mercer's timeline? Midnight, Ray replied. He's sending 3 guys, same ones who hit the shelter. Morgan checked his watch. That gives us just over an hour. He looked at Thomas and Dr. Patel. You two should stay here where it's safe. Thomas shook his head firmly. That center represents everything I've been given back. Purpose, dignity, hope. I'm not hiding while Mercer tries to destroy it. Scout stood at attention beside him, as if understanding and supporting his human's decision. Morgan nodded, respecting Thomas's choice. He turned to Ray. And you? Why risk yourself to help us? Ray stared down at his hands for a long moment before answering. I used to be somebody, you know. Regional sales director for a pharmaceutical company. Corner office, company car, respect. His voice grew bitter. Then the company got caught pushing opioids, knowing they were addictive. I lost everything, job, wife, house. He looked up, meeting Morgan's gaze directly. I know what it's like, to fall, to have people look through you like you're nothing. I've been taking my anger out on the world, becoming exactly what people expected me to be. His eyes shifted to Thomas and Scout. But today, listening to you speak, it reminded me that I have a choice about who I am. The room fell silent. As the words hung in the air, Thomas studied the man who had caused him so much pain, seeing for the first time the broken humanity beneath the cruelty. What do you get out of helping us? Thomas asked finally. Ray's answer was simple. A chance to stand on the right side for once. Morgan rose, decision made. Time is short. If we're going to stop Mercer, we need to move now. He looked at Ray. You know his men, their methods. We need that knowledge. Ray nodded, a determination settling over his features. I'm in. As they prepared to leave, Morgan pulled Thomas aside. Are you certain about this? There's no shame in staying behind. Thomas looked down at Scout, who stood ready beside him, then back to Morgan. A week ago, I was invisible. People walked past me like I didn't exist. You changed that. You saw me, heard me, reminded me that my life has value. His voice strengthened with resolve. I can't go back to being invisible, Morgan. Not even to stay safe. Morgan placed a hand on Thomas's shoulder, pride evident in his eyes. Then let's show Mercer what happens when the invisible become visible. They moved toward the door as a group. The acclaimed actor, the homeless teacher, the veterinarian, the fallen biker, and a loyal dog. An unlikely alliance forged in crisis, united by a common purpose. Outside, the rain had stopped. The clouds parted, revealing a sliver of moon that cast pale light over the wet landscape. The night was far from over, but as they stepped into Morgan's waiting car, even the darkness seemed less absolute. Redemption's Edge was a precarious place to stand, but for now they stood there together. The Westwood Community Center stood silent in the midnight hour, its windows dark save for the security lights that cast a soft glow across the empty parking lot. From their position in a van across the street, Morgan, Thomas, Ray, and Dr. Patel watched the building where just hours earlier the power of shared stories had brought a room full of strangers to their feet. Police scanners are quiet, reported. Morgan's security chief threw their earpieces. News vans are 3 minutes out. Morgan nodded, his eyes fixed on Ray. You're certain they're coming? Mercer doesn't change plans, Ray confirmed. He's sending his guys to send a message. Same. Ones who trashed the shelter. Scout sat alert between Thomas and Dr. Patel in the back seat. His ears perked forward, as if he too understood the gravity of the moment. Thomas rested a hand on the dog's head, drawing strength from his companion's steadfast presence. There, Dr. Patel whispered, pointing to a dark sedan turning slowly onto the street, headlights off. They watched as the vehicle parked in the shadows behind the community center. 3 figures emerged, carrying duffel bags that undoubtedly contained accelerants and whatever else they needed to burn the building to the ground. It's time, Morgan said, his deep voice calm but resolute. He pressed a button on his phone, and suddenly the night erupted with light as the community center's exterior floodlights blazed to life, illuminating the parking lot and the 3 startled men caught in the unexpected glare. Simultaneously, James Wright and 2 security guards emerged from inside the building, while Morgan's security team approached from concealed positions around the perimeter. The would-be arsonists froze, caught in a rapidly closing trap. Now, Morgan instructed his driver, who flashed the van's headlights twice, the signal for the news vans waiting around the corner to approach. As the first news van rounded the corner, lights blazing and camera already rolling, the 3 men dropped their bags and ran for their sedan. They didn't make it far. Police sirens wailed in the distance, not Mercer's bought officers, but the honest ones Morgan's team had specifically contacted, providing evidence too compelling to ignore. That's our cue, Morgan said, opening the van door. Thomas, Dr. Patel, and Ray followed, Scout trotting faithfully at Thomas's side. The scene unfolded like something from a film, the 3 arsonists being detained, news cameras capturing everything. James Wright standing defiant before the community center he had built from nothing. And at the center of it all stood Morgan Freeman, his presence drawing the cameras like moths to a flame. But Morgan didn't step forward to take the microphone. Instead, he turned to Thomas. This is your story, he said quietly. Your voice changed minds today. It needs to be heard again now. Thomas hesitated, looking from Morgan to the gathering reporters, then down at Scout. The dog gazed up at him with absolute trust, as he had on that bridge 3 years ago when Thomas had been ready to end it all. Taking a deep breath, Thomas stepped forward. Vincent Mercer was enjoying a glass of scotch in his penthouse when his phone began buzzing incessantly. Irritated, he switched on the television to find his own face splashed across the screen, beneath a headline that made his blood run cold. Developer Vincent Mercer linked to arson attempt at community centre. The Scotch glass slipped from his fingers as he watched Thomas Ward, the homeless man who should have been scared into silence, standing before a bank of microphones, speaking with the quiet authority of a man who had found his voice and would never again be silenced. Tonight we witnessed an attempt to destroy not just a building, but a symbol of hope for countless individuals seeking a second chance, Thomas was saying, his voice steady and clear. This center represents the belief that no one is disposable, that everyone deserves dignity and opportunity. The camera panned to show Morgan Freeman standing beside him, along with James Wright and, incredibly, Ray Harding, the very man Mercer had hired to track them down. As Thomas continued speaking, detailing Mercer's campaign of intimidation against the homeless population and small businesses in neighborhoods targeted for development, Mercer's other phone, the secure one, began to ring. His lawyer, then his political contacts. One by one, the carefully cultivated connections that had protected him for years were severing ties, running for cover as his empire began to crumble in real time. The doorbell rang. Mercer already knew who it was. 3 months later, the community center was filled once again, but this time for a celebration. Streamers hung from the ceiling, tables were laden with food, and laughter filled the air as program participants, staff and supporters gathered to mark a new beginning. Thomas, now the center's literacy program director, stood by the main entrance greeting arrivals. He wore a simple suit, his beard neatly trimmed, his eyes clear and focused. Scout sat beside him, sporting a new vest that identified him as the center's official therapy dog, his coat glossy from good nutrition and care. "Quite a turnout," observed Morgan Freeman, approaching with a warm smile. "You should be proud." Thomas shook his head modestly. "None of this would have happened without you." "I only opened a door," Morgan corrected him. "You walked through it and then held it open for others." He nodded toward a corner of the room where Ray Harding, looking almost unrecognizable in a button-down shirt and slacks, was helping a group of adults work through reading exercises. After testifying against Vincent Mercer, who now awaited trial on charges ranging from conspiracy to attempted arson to racketeering, Ray had begun volunteering at the center, finding unexpected purpose in helping others rebuild their lives. "Some would say he doesn't deserve a second chance," Thomas remarked, watching Ray patiently guide an elderly man through a difficult passage. "And what would you say?" Morgan asked. Thomas smiled. "That second chances aren't earned, they're given, and how we use them defines who we become." The center's doors opened again, admitting Dr. Patel along with several volunteers and a very special group of visitors. Dogs from the shelter, now part of a program where literacy students practiced reading aloud to attentive canine listeners. The Mayor just arrived, Dr. Patel announced, nodding toward the parking lot where a group of officials were emerging from a town car. And the grant committee, the community center, once threatened with destruction, was now the flagship for a citywide initiative addressing homelessness through education and support services. The publicity surrounding Mercer's arrest had sparked a broader conversation about development, displacement, and the human cost of urban renewal. As the mayor entered, Morgan prepared to step back, content to let others take the spotlight. But Thomas caught his arm. "Stay," he said simply. "You're part of this story, too." Morgan nodded, understanding the invitation for what it was, not a request for celebrity endorsement, but the inclusion of a friend who had become part of their unlikely family. As the celebration continued around them, Thomas knelt to scratch, Scout behind the ears, the dog's tail wagging happily against the polished floor. "We made it, boy," he whispered. Later that evening, as the event wound down, Thomas and Morgan stood outside the center, looking up at the stars emerging in the twilight sky. "I've been thinking about that day in the parking lot," Thomas said, quietly. "How one moment can change everything." Morgan nodded, his gaze still on the stars. "It's not the moments themselves that matter most," he replied, his voice carrying that distinctive timbre that had narrated humanity's greatest stories. "It's what we choose to do with them." Across the street, a homeless man sat with a small, dog beside him, watching the community center with curious eyes. Thomas saw him, recognized the wariness, the exhaustion, the fading hope in his posture. Without hesitation, Thomas crossed the street, Scout trotting beside him. Morgan watched. As Thomas introduced himself, as Scout gently approached the man's dog, as a connection formed, and in that moment the circle closed. One voice had indeed changed everything, not just by being heard, but by ensuring that others would be heard as well. The city continued around them, its rhythms unaltered, its contrasts still stark. But in this small corner, the invisible had become visible, and once seen they could never be unseen again.